Good morning, everyone.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor.
In unison, good morning.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense will call Mr. Jay Leno.
All right, come forward, please. When you get to the witness stand, remain standing. Face the clerk here and raise your right hand.
Yes, I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Jay Leno. Leno.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Leno.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Mr. Leno, in your work, do you deal with children's organizations?
Yes, quite a bit.
And what do you do?
There are groups like Phone Friends, Make-A-Wish. You'll get phone calls, children in the hospital. Could you give them a call? And they'll ask you questions about, oh, did you meet Britney Spears? Whatever it might be, but usually that type of thing. It's usually kids that are maybe lonely or sick or something, and they watch TV or they watch it late at night, and you try to cheer them up. And it usually goes through, as I said, organizations like Phone Friends and Make-A-Wish.
Do you have a specific procedure that you typically follow to learn about a child's desire in this regard?
Well, when it comes from a legitimate organization, there's no procedure. We deal with them on, I would say maybe 15 a week, sometimes 20 a week. So, could you call? You'll get a list of children. These are some kids that would like to hear from you today. Okay, sometimes they're in Minneapolis or they're all over the country. And you have a 5 or 10 minute phone call. And then sometimes you do a follow-up and you send a picture and hats, things like that.
Now, do you have someone who screens these calls for you?
Well, my assistant, who screens them. Not necessarily those calls, but, all calls, yeah.
And is there a particular number that people get a hold of if they want to reach you or talk to you about something like this?
I'm pretty accessible, either through the main Tonight Show number or my number at the show.
How many years have you been dealing with children's organizations like the ones you've described?
Well, I've been doing the Tonight Show about 13 years and certainly that long. And before that, more informally.
And does your work with children involve simply talking to them on the phone, or do you make visits and things of that sort?
Any of those things. Sometimes with Make-A-Wish, you'll have a situation where those are especially sad, because sometimes they're terminally ill children. They'll say, oh, this kid's 15, and he always wanted to go for a ride in a Lamborghini, or something like that. And sometimes kids will come over to the garage and we'll take them for a ride. And maybe they want a backstage tour of the Tonight Show. Maybe they want to sit at the desk and talk in the microphone. So it varies. Sometimes it's just a phone call, and sometimes it's a little more than that.
And if you decide to do something for a child, or an organization of children, what are the kinds of things you will do? What benefits will you provide them?
Sometimes it's an auction type deal to raise money. Sometimes they'll say, we're having, this child was in a car accident, or whatever it might be. The family is having an auction. Would you sign some items or have celebrities sign items? Sometimes you'll make a donation. Sometimes it's tickets to the show. It really varies on a case-by-case basis.
And if people want to raise money through you, how do they go about it?
Well, you just sort of call and tell us what the situation is, and if we can do something to help, that's what we do. I mean, we try to do a little something for everybody that calls. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less.
Do you sometimes reject requests from parents or children?
I don't know if reject is quite the word. I mean, sometimes you try to make. If it goes through a legitimate organization, no, you don't reject them. Sometimes you get the odd, I'm a farmer. Our crops are, our tractor's broken. Our fields are not doing well, and the return address is Brooklyn, New York. So you go, that seems a little suspicious. So that one you kind of go, I don't really know how legitimate that one is. So, you take them on a case-by-case basis.
At times, do people who want to reach you get a hold of you directly?
Yes.
And how does that happen?
They just call me. I'm pretty accessible. I pick up the phone. I go, hi, this is Jay. And they go, no, it's not. And I go, yes, it is. And then I spend 10 minutes convincing them it is me, yeah.
Will they call the studio to reach you directly?
Yes, and I'll probably get a lot more calls after this. Laughter. My phone will be ringing tomorrow. Thank you for that. Laughter.
If they call the studio, can they get right to you or do they go right?
Sometimes they can get right to me, actually. Yes, they can. Up until today, they could get right to me. Laughter. Until just a few moments ago, you could reach me quite easily. Laughter.
The numbers that might get right to you, where do they get access to that?
Well, other performers, comedians, car guys. I mean, my number is pretty much out there. I mean, I wasn't even unlisted until a couple of years ago. I was in the phone book.
Do you know someone named Jamie Masada?
Yes, Jamie owns the Laugh Factory, a comedy club in Hollywood.
Have you known him for a long time?
Yes. I tend to work some of the other clubs. I don't work his club very often. I've been doing this a long time, so I had some clubs that I worked. And then he opened up, and he was sort of the new club. And I kind of stuck with the clubs that I worked all the time. But, yes, I know him. Yeah.
And would it be accurate to say he's a friend of yours?
Well, an acquaintance, yeah. A friend is all right. He's asked me for favors and things, yeah. Friend is okay.
Is he a close friend?
No, I wouldn't say close friend.
Do you go to the Laugh Factory often?
No, not very often.
When were you last there, if you remember?
Oh, maybe a year ago. Not quite a year ago. A comedian, George Miller, had passed away, and they had a little service for him with a bunch of comics, and we all went down and told some jokes. I think that was about a year or so ago. Maybe a little bit longer. And occasionally, Jamie does a lot of benefits, and he'll say, "Oh, could you come down and do 15 minutes or something?" And that's usually what it was. I don't work there, but I'll go down and do benefits and things.
Do you know someone named Louise Palanker?
Yeah, Louise is a comedian. Yeah.
Is she a friend of yours?
Yes, I've known Louise for a long time.
And would you describe her as a close friend?
No, not a close friend, but an acquaintance. She dated a friend of mine, and I got to know her through him.
Do you remember a couple of years ago receiving a call from a child named Gavin?
Yes.
And approximately when did that happen?
Well, let's see, it's quite a few years ago. I guess 2000 maybe.
And was it your understanding that Gavin had cancer?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I was told.
Did you ever talk to Gavin's mother?
I believe I did. The circumstance. I had gotten a number of calls, and I had, there are ways to sort of legitimize this. I had gotten these calls. And I called the hospital. I was put through to a room. I believe I spoke to Gavin. And I think I spoke to possibly his brother, and I think I spoke to his mother. It's a little confusing, because these kind of conversations do tend to run together. When you make 3 or 4 of them a day, and you're calling hospitals, especially when it's 5 years ago, it's a little tricky. But I was told by Louise that they were really happy to hear from me, that I had called the room. So that verified yes, I did call. Because whenever I hear from a child, I always try to follow up on it. So I'm sure I called.
Now, how did you learn about Gavin?
I had gotten a number of voicemails from him. That's how I was made aware.
Okay, and did the voicemails give you a number to call the hospital?
I'm not sure if the voicemails gave me the number or if I got the number from Louise, but somehow I obtained the number. I can't be sure on that point.
And you've indicated, Mr. Leno, you think you talked to Gavin's mother, right?
I think so, yes.
Okay, and do you recall whether she called you or you called her?
No, I called. I called the hospital room. I had gotten a number of voicemails from the child, and I called the hospital room.
And they put you through at Kaiser to Gavin?
I guess it was Kaiser. I can't remember what hospital it was, but they put me through to the room. Now, I'm not sure whether he was maybe a little groggy. I spoke to someone. It might have been the brother. And I believe I spoke to the mother, but I can't be 100% sure, but I think I did.
Do you recall what Gavin said to you?
The conversation in the hospital? Or any of the voicemails?
Well, let's start with the voicemails.
Okay, the voicemails I got were, "Oh, I'm a big fan. You're the greatest." Overly effusive for a 12-year-old. Most of the times when you talk to children, they talk like, "Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you." Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to pull it out of them. "Hi, how you feeling?" "Good, hi." I mean, you're talking to a kid. And this sounded very adult-like conversation. I thought, it just, perked my interest at the time.
When you say, Overly effusive, what do you mean?
Jay Leno, you're the greatest. You know, I think you're wonderful. You're my hero. This type of thing, which seemed a little odd to me at the time, for someone so young. Why a comedian in his mid-50s would be, you know, I'm not Batman. You know what I mean? It just seemed a little unusual, but okay. And then I got 2 or 3 more.
Okay, were the 2 or 3 more messages from Gavin, as far as you know?
Yes.
Did you ever get any messages from anyone who claimed to be Gavin's mother?
No, I didn't get any from the mother. Just from the child.
Okay, and based on those messages you then called the hospital?
Called the hospital. And I believe I sent, you know, hat, t-shirts, that type of thing.
Okay, and you spoke to Gavin at the hospital, right?
Again, to the best of my knowledge, I did. Whether he was groggy, or in bed, or, hi, And then I spoke to someone else. And then I believe I spoke to the mother, who seemed very pleased that I called.
Do you recall what the mother said to you?
No, very general. Thank you so much. And, you know, my conversation was along the line, you know, our prayers are with you, that type of thing. And, if he gets out, and he'd like to tour the Tonight Show studios, you know, that type of thing.
Was that the only time you recall speaking to Gavin?
Yes, I believe that is.
And was that the only time you recall speaking to the mother?
Yes, I believe so.
Do you recall ever getting any messages after that from Gavin or the mother?
No, I don't think I did. I don't think I got any more after that.
Okay, at some point, did you complain to Louise Palanker about messages you were getting from Gavin?
It wasn't so much a complaint. I just said to her, what's the story here? This doesn't sound like a 12-year-old. This sounds like an adult person. It seemed, I think the words I used was, it seemed a little scripted in his speech. And then she said to me, you know, that's just the way he is. He wants to be a comic, so he writes everything out before he says it, and then he kind of reads it. And I said, oh, okay. Well, that sort of made sense at the time.
Now, the child at the time was approximately 13, right?
No, I think he was younger than that.
He was younger than that? Okay.
This is about, what?
2000?
2000, yeah. This was just another typical day at the office up to this point. I didn't think anything unusual. So I guess he was younger than that, wasn't he?
What, about 10?
10 or 11 possibly.
Did you ever ask Louise Palanker who was writing these questions out for Gavin?
No, I don't think I said that. I think I just said, you know, it sounded real scripted. It sounded like, it didn't sound like. And she said, well, he's very mature and he wants to be a comic, and so he's very careful in what he says. And I said, oh, okay.
Did that seem unusual to you?
Well, once I got that explanation, it didn't seem unusual. It was just unusual for a child to contact me directly, because usually, as I said, at the very least, a parent, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, phone friends, make a wish, those people call and say, you'll be getting a call from this young boy or this young girl. Oh, okay, expected at this time. Okay, to just get a call out of the blue was a little unusual.
When you say it seemed scripted, do you mean coached?
I'm going to object as speculative.
No, it just.
Just a moment.
Oh.
Sustained.
Okay, sorry.
Did Louise tell you someone had written out what Gavin was supposed to say?
I'm going to object as hearsay, Your Honor. Sustained.
At some point, did you ask that Gavin stop calling?
I asked Louise, I said, you know, I've been getting a lot. I don't think I said, stop calling. But I said, you know, I've been getting a lot of these calls. And she said, oh, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And I said, okay.
When you said that to Louise, was it your desire that those calls stop?
Yes.
And why was that?
Because it was kind of the same call, sort of over and over again.
Did the child seem to call more than most do?
Well, most children don't call. You call them, and you do follow-ups, and things like that. Every now and then I will give a child a private number if it seems especially. I didn't do that in this case. But I'm not saying I never get calls directly from children, but this was a little unusual.
Do you recall the mother being in the background of your call to Gavin?
I remember someone in the background, but again, I couldn't say it was the mother. It could have been a nurse. I just remember hearing someone talking as he was talking.
And after your last conversation with Gavin, did you ever do anything for Gavin?
No, I never sent any money. I sent, I think, Tonight Show paraphernalia, hats, t-shirts, pictures. I wasn't asked for any money, nor did I send any.
In your conversation with Gavin, did you decide at some point to terminate the call?
No, it wasn't. Whatever conversation we had, the best of my recollection, it was very brief. Because he was ill and I think he was, maybe in the hospital bed or something. And that seemed more, hi, how are you? Okay, hey, listen, keep your hopes up, and this type of thing.
And do you recall whether or not you ever met Gavin?
No, I don't think I ever met him.
Do you recall whether or not you ever met the mother?
No, never met the mother.
Okay. Did you tell any of your assistants to try and stop the calls?
I don't believe so. I think I just spoke to Louise about it. And I think Louise said, "Oh, I'll take care of it. I'll speak to him."
Did the calls stop?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examine?
Thank you. Mr. Leno, good morning.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you today?
Fine.
Welcome to Santa Maria.
Why, thank you. It's a lovely town.
Mr. Leno, is it fair to say that you probably get calls? Maybe 100 calls a year or even more from children who are in distress.
A lot more than that. Yeah, easily a couple of hundred. Maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6, 7 a week. One a day probably.
Would you say that your recollection of your conversation with Gavin was as clear as your conversation with any of the other children you may have spoken to over that same year?
Not much clearer, because, again, the conversation was in 2000. I thought nothing unusual until, 3 or 4 years later. So then I was thinking back,
3 or 4 years later you did get a call from law enforcement, is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time they asked you about any conversations you may have had with a young child named Gavin?
Yes, they did.
At the time of that conversation, were you familiar with the content of a documentary that had screened entitled, Living with Michael Jackson?
Yes, I had seen that.
Objection. Beyond the scope.
It deals with recollection and familiarity with the name.
All right, overruled.
That's the Bashir documentary, Martin Bashir?
Yes, I saw that, yes.
And the part that you actually saw of that documentary, did it feature a child named Gavin?
Yes, it did.
At the time that the police contacted you, did you make an association between the name, Gavin, and that feature with Michael Jackson?
Well, I had made it before that. The feature was on, and I had heard from a friend of mine.
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Oh.
At that point in time, you heard, excuse me, let me try that one more time.
Okay.
At some point in time you drew a correlation between the Gavin who was in the documentary, Living with Michael Jackson, and the Gavin who had called you, is that correct?
Yes. Because the name, Gavin, is very unusual. And I saw, Gavin, cancer. Hey, wait a minute. I spoke to a Gavin that had cancer. I wonder if it's the same one.
Alright, did that cause you to believe at the time law enforcement contacted you that that was the same child?
Well, they didn't contact me until 2 years later.
Okay, alright. Now, in the course of the conversations, in the course of the phone calls that were made by Gavin to you. That went to your voicemail.
Right.
Do you have a sense of how many calls those were?
Well, I think there were at least 3 or 4. I think it was there were 3 or 4. And then I think we had gone on hiatus, vacation. And when we had come back, there were a few more. And that's when I spoke to Louise and said, what's going on? I keep getting a lot of these calls. And she said, I'll take care of it. He gets overanxious, whatever it might be. I said, okay, it's not a big deal. And then I didn't hear any more.
Did she explain to you that Gavin was in and out of the hospital dealing with chemotherapy?
Yes, she did.
And had a fair amount of time on his hands?
Oh, yeah.
Did she tell you that he, in fact, did watch your show every night?
She did. She went on to explain that he was a big fan. You just tend to be, in my position, as I said, there's a lot of odd. You don't know whether it's a radio station playing a trick on you. So your first contacts sometimes are very, okay. How are you doing? Where are you from? You know. And then it wasn't until I called the hospital, oh, this really a child who really is sick. Okay. Then it got more real, you know.
Were you aware? Did you become aware at any time that Gavin Arvizo was a graduate of the comedy camp at the Laugh Factory?
I found that out later, yeah.
And you're familiar with the comedy camp, are you not?
I know of it. I have never been to it, but I know of it, yeah.
You understand that's a Jamie Masada creation?
Right.
And that's for disadvantaged children?
Right.
Were you aware that he had kind of a long association with comedians like Chris Tucker and George Lopez and had even met Adam Sandler?
Yeah, I found that out later.
Would that tend to suggest to you that he really did have a sincere appreciation of comedians?
Yes, it did.
Does that clarify, at least in your mind, to some extent the motivation for the multiple voice messages that he left?
Yes, it became clear.
Did he ask you for money in any of these calls?
No one ever asked me for anything. And I'm sure of that, because if they had, I would have sent something.
Did Gavin ask you to do anything in these calls other than speak with him?
I know I sent a picture and a hat and some other things. I was told by Louise he had the picture over his bed and he was thrilled to get it. So other than that, no, I was never asked for any, financial things or anything like that.
Alright, and so you never had occasion to send them money, is that correct?
No.
And he did not ask you for money, is that right?
No one asked me for money.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay.
Mr. Leno, when the police called you, did they call you at the studio?
Called me at the studio, yeah.
Did you know you were being secretly recorded?
No.
Did you ever learn that?
Yeah, I did learn that actually.
Do you remember when the police asked you if they were looking for money, you said, I think so.
Yeah, I probably did say that. But they never asked me for any money. But at the time when I got the phone calls, originally, it sounded, as I said, it sounded suspicious. When a young person that overly effusive, and, oh, Mr. Leno, you're the greatest. And I thought, really? Why would, it just didn't quite click for me, you know.
And you thought they were looking for money, right?
I'm going to object as asked and answered an improper opinion.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Does the degree of effusiveness, is that explained by his affection that you now understand for comedians?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Alright. You did not know at the time of those voice messages that this is a child who had been a graduate of the Laugh Factory, Laugh Academy, is that correct?
No, I didn't know, because, as I said, it was unusual to have a 12-year-old child leave you a long voice message. In the kind of business I'm in, you hear from a lot of crazy people, you know. And things, and you're reluctant sometimes to follow up. But whenever it's a child, I always do follow up. You kind of drop all your guard, and go, okay, let me just, because this might be real, you know. So that's what I did here.
When you actually had the conversation with Gavin, was he gracious on the telephone?
Again, that recollection is not clear to me. Because having spoken to a number of children in the hospital, 4 or 5 a week sometimes it kind of, especially when children are sick, you tend to have a very general conversation along the lines of, our prayers are with you. And, your parents love you. And, when you get out, maybe you'll be able to do this, or, come to our show, and we'll give you a VIP seat, and, so you tend to talk in very general terms, so I can't be real specific about that.
Could you have been speaking with a nurse when you were talking with Gavin at the hospital?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, you got on the telephone with a female, is that correct?
Yes. At the time I believe it was the mother.
Okay. There was no advance notice from you that you would be placing that call, is that right?
No, I tend to be. I like to take care of things as they happen. You get a call, you get a letter. Okay, give me that number. Let me call them right now, because if I put it down, there will be 3 more, and, you don't want to leave a kid hanging. So, yeah, you take care of it right away.
And there had been a series of phone calls over a period of time, is that correct?
Yes.
And a vacation?
I believe so.
Okay. And then a conversation with Louise Palanker?
Right.
And then you called back?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And there were no other calls after that conversation, is that correct?
No.
Objection. Misstates the evidence.
Oh.
Overruled. You may answer.
Is that true?
That
there were no other calls from Gavin to your voice message after your conversation?
Right. After my conversation with Louise Palanker, she said, he gets real excited. I'll take care of it. And I said, okay.
Then you called Gavin at the hospital afterward, after your conversation with Louise Palanker?
No, I think it was before. Again, I can't say for sure. Because it all tends to blend together. I remember I believe I called the hospital. And then after that, I think the messages came after that, but I would not swear to it.
And nobody from your office arranged that telephone call in advance? In other words.
No, I just pick up the call and I just pick up the phone and I make the call.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Leno, when you spoke to Gavin and his mother.
Uh-huh.
Did you know the family was trying to get money from various celebrities?
I'm going to object as assuming facts not in evidence, beyond the scope of cross-examination.
Sustained.
Did you know anything about any fundraisers at the Laugh Factory?
Objection. Irrelevant.
Oh.
Sustained.
No further questions.
No further questions.
Thank you. You may step down.
We have Renee Zellweger on the show tonight. Laughter.
Call your next witness.
Could I have just a second to make sure the next witness is there? Because I believe he is. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'll call Suli McCullough. He's on our list, but he's farther down the list.
That's fine, counsel. Come to the front of the courtroom, please. When you get to the witness stand, I'd like you to remain standing up there. Face the clerk over here and raise your right hand.
Yes.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Suli McCullough. S-U-L-I. Last name, M-C-C-U-L-L-O-U-G-H.
Thank you.
Mr. McCullough, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well so far. Now, you need to talk into the other one. That one, yeah, it's kind of hard to get close enough to it. Alright, first of all, what is your occupation?
I'm a stand-up comedian, a writer and an actor.
There you go. And do you have any connection from time to time with the Laugh Factory?
Yes, I perform there regularly. I've been a regular there since 1989.
Alright, and do you know Jamie Masada?
Yes, I do.
Okay, now, have you ever met Michael Jackson?
No, I have not.
Alright, at the Laugh Factory, did you have occasion to meet a child by the name of Gavin Arvizo?
Yes, I did.
And did you have occasion to actually visit him at the hospital from time to time?
Yes, I did.
About how many times?
I would say about 3 or 4 times.
Alright, did you have extensive dealings with Gavin, or how would you describe it?
I would say, yeah, I did have extensive dealings with Gavin. He was in my comedy camp. Comedy camp is something we do for underprivileged kids, and we teach them the fundamentals of stand-up.
Alright, and for instance, have you ever been to his house?
No, I have not.
Has he ever been to your house?
No, they did call my house often. And I invited the family. I was on the Jamie Foxx show for a couple seasons, and I invited the family to a taping.
Did they go?
Yes, they did.
So at some point, you understood that Gavin Arvizo became sick, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Was there a fundraiser that was organized by Jamie Masada at the Laugh Factory?
Yes, there was. We actually did 2 fundraisers.
I was going to ask you how many.
We did 2, yes.
Were you there at the fundraisers?
I was there for both fundraisers.
Did you see how they were put on? In other words, what happened?
Yes, I did see how they were put on. I also participated in both of them.
So you participated as a comedian on the stage.
That's correct.
Is that correct? And did you see the actual fundraising, the collecting of the money?
No, I did not.
Alright, now, in the course of this fundraising, were you told by Jamie Masada what the purpose of the fundraisers were?
Yes, I was.
And what did he tell you the purpose was?
He told me the purpose.
Objection. Hearsay.
It's impeachment.
All right, overruled.
Jamie told me that the purpose of the fundraisers were to raise money to help pay for the medical expenses.
All object as irrelevant.
Overruled.
And did you have occasion to be at a press conference held by Jamie Masada on January 5, 2005? I think that was the date.
Yes, I was.
Alright, and did Mr. Masada at that press conference indicate that the fundraiser for Gavin Arvizo was put on?
I'm going to object as leading in hearsay.
Seuss, I didn't hear the whole question. Do you want to?
It may be leading. Rather than just blurt it out, let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Did Mr. Masada speak at that press conference?
Yes, he did.
And did he state the purpose of the fundraiser for Gavin Arvizo at that press conference?
I don't remember if he did or not.
And did you?
Did I state that? Yes, I did.
And you stated at that time that it was for raising money for medical bills, right?
That's correct.
Objection. Leading in hearsay.
Sustained.
Alright, did you state the purpose of the fundraiser at that time?
Yes, I did.
Alright, and what did you say it was?
I said.
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Can I continue?
Was Mr. Masada present at the press conference when you spoke?
Mr. Masada was present, yes.
And you stated the purpose of the fundraiser as you understood it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Cross-examine?
Good morning, Mr. McCullough. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm just fine. You had a conversation with Mr. Masada where he told you that Gavin's fundraiser was going to help raise money for medical expenses.
Jamie asked me to participate in the fundraiser and he said that the money would be used to help cover the medical expenses. That's correct.
Okay. Were you aware whether or not Gavin was going to have any medical expenses after he got out of the hospital?
From visiting him in the hospital, and knowing that, where the family came from, it was pretty common knowledge that medical expenses are expensive. And yes, they were going to incur some costs.
Okay. Did you know that they were going to have to prepare a safe room or a room that would be germ-free for Gavin after he got out of the hospital?
I was aware of that, yes.
Would you consider that a medical expense?
I would, yes.
Alright, thank you. No further questions.
Were you aware that the germ-free room was paid for by Louise Palanker?
Objection. Hearsay, foundation, and vague as to time, I would say.
The objection sustained.
Were you aware that, as of the time that you made this last statement in January of 2005 about the fundraiser being for medical expenses, were you aware that Gavin Arvizo had full medical coverage through Kaiser Permanente as a result of his father's longtime employment at Vaughn's?
No, I was not aware of that.
Objection. Hearsay. Irrelevant.
Overruled. The answer is in.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
No further questions.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Call your next witness, please.
Judge, I'm sorry, one of the jurors needs to go to the back room.
She had to step out for a second. Can counsel approach? We can take up that issue that we were going to have to take up.
Do you mean the motions?
Yeah.
Okay.
On your motion. Discussion held off the record at sidebar. To juror number 5. Just so you know, I used that time very effectively.
Thank you.
All right, call your next witness.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Okay. Monica Wakefield, please.
Come to the witness stand, please. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk over here and raise your right hand.
Yes. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
I'm Monica de los Santos Wakefield. Shall I spell my last name?
Yes, please.
Wakefield.
Thank you.
All right, Miss Wakefield. The first thing we tell everybody is to lean into that right microphone, the one on the right. It's a little hard to do so.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. How are you employed?
I work for Kaiser Permanente Regional Reference Laboratory.
And where is that located?
North Hollywood.
All right, now, at some point, you were contacted by the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department to look into some medical records. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you did that for them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you reported back your findings?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to refer to that same incident. Before I do that, do you recall roughly when it was that you talked to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
When was that?
I think that was a year ago, May or March. One of the months.
Okay,
For sure.
March or May, but sometime sort of the spring of 2004, is that right?
Yes.
And were you asked to look into your records to see if a creatinine clearance test had been conducted with regard to a patient, Gavin Arvizo?
Yes.
Did you determine whether or not that had occurred?
I don't understand what you mean. If that had, the test was taken?
Whether or not the test was taken, yes. Did you look into the records to determine what had happened?
Yes.
All right. Do you recall when the procedure, the medical procedure, occurred? That is, the sample was brought in?
I don't remember the date of collection, because it was on microfiche when I received the photocopy from microfiche.
All right.
And so I don't remember the date of collection. But I do remember that I think there was. It's been a year, so I apologize. Not enough specimen for the test to be completed, I think.
All right. May I approach with, or let me ask you if it would refresh your recollection to take a look at a police report that was.
Certainly.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to leave this up here. I have another copy. You can look at the whole thing. And I think you might want to look right around that area of the report. Take a moment. Read that over, and see if that helps refresh your recollection as to what it was that you reviewed when you looked at the records, and then I'll ask the specific questions.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you know who may have the microfiche copy that I had sent? May I look at that if it's available?
If you sent it
To Sergeant Roble.
to Sergeant Roble, well, you can ask that question and I can't answer it.
Okay.
Sergeant Roble happens to be in the courtroom, but let's go on with what we've got here as best you can.
Okay.
If you need to look at the underlying records, we'll take a break, call another witness, and we can try to find those records. Let's see how far we can get.
Sure.
If this helps you refresh your recollection. Does it at all?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so do you recall when the original report for medical services was? In other words, somebody came to Kaiser Permanente with regard to this creatinine clearance on a particular date. Do you recall what that date was?
I don't remember the date of collection. I just remember the phone call.
All right.
I think it was.
Reviewing the report does not refresh your recollection as to the date?
The date of collection where the specimen could have been taken, is that what you mean?
The outpatient summary report, the date that something occurred at Kaiser Permanente.
Like on Tuesday, May 11th, right? Talking about that one, when I received the fax?
Yes,
I do remember that.
Okay, now, there's a date of the actual report that's in this report. Does that refresh your recollection as to that date? If it does, fine. And if it doesn't, that's okay.
Yes.
What was the date that the actual summary report occurred?
It was the 10th.
March 10th of what year?
Last year, so it was 2004. Last year, May. I think it was May 9th or 10th. I'm looking back into my memory bank here, and of the phone call, and of the date of the phone call originally. And then when I had faxed it to Sergeant Roble, I think it was May 11th.
All right, it was May 11th, 2004, when you faxed the report to Sergeant Roble?
Okay.
So the question is, what was the date of the original report?
The date of collection?
You're saying date of report.
What I mean is when a patient comes in and has their specimen drawn. Is that what you mean?
Okay, alright.
That I don't recall.
Okay, and looking at that paragraph doesn't refresh.
It does not ring a bell.
Okay, so you would be able to.
I may be able to help speed this up a little bit. You may want to show her this.
Okay, thank you. May I? Yes, okay. May I approach with this document?
Yes.
Let's see if that helps.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I'm glad to help.
Thank you, Mr. Sneddon. Okay, alright. Now, take a look at that and then see. First of all, as soon as you're finished looking at it, let me know and I'll ask you a question.
Okay, I do have a memo of that. Uh-huh.
Alright, now, was that a record that is kept in the ordinary course of business at Kaiser Permanente?
Not in our department, but it is on microfiche. When it's in the system, there's a certain amount of days that it's kept in the system and then it's purged and then we have to request for microfiche.
And you are a client service advocate for Kaiser Permanente, is that correct?
Yes.
And so your job is to field issues and problems that relate to services that are provided for patients of Kaiser Permanente, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's your job to routinely look into the records of Kaiser Permanente to determine what procedures were performed and report that to other people, is that correct?
Your Honor.
Only two.
Excuse me. Maybe I can speed this up, too. If counsel is trying to establish the business records exception, I'll stipulate that the exhibit can be admitted into evidence.
I think I'll accept that. May I take one more look at it, just to see?
We only speak to medical staff.
Hold on 1 second. Alright, before I accept that stipulation, can I ask a few more questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you. When you look at that particular document.
Counsel, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind? Let's put a number on it right now.
I realized that just as I started to talk. Defense next in order, please.
All right, what is that?
That would be 5,107.
That will be 5,107. Yes, go ahead.
Alright, now, looking at Exhibit 5,107, does that indicate when the patient came to Kaiser Permanente?
Yes. It says, date of collection.
Was that March 10, 2003?
Yes.
Alright, and the patient in that case was Gavin Arvizo, is that right?
It does say so.
Okay, now, it does not say on that report that there is not an adequate specimen, does it?
It says, no specimen received. So according to this, the technologist who tested in the chemistry department did not have a specimen to test.
Okay, now, does it tell you whether or not, which specimen we're talking about, a urine or a blood specimen?
Doesn't indicate to me.
Does it show that there is a urine specimen of 90 milliliters?
I think with that indication of 90 milliliters, I think that means that they need at least that, or they need that to complete the test. But it says, the TV is total volume. So if it says 90 milliliters and for the specimen container to be in, and there's nothing in there, it's going to say, no specimen received. They will result it out as no specimen received, if it's an empty.
Do you remember telling the Santa Barbara sheriffs that it was noted in the results that the urine sample contained 90 milliliters? So the question is whether or not you recall telling the sheriff that.
I don't remember.
Do you recall telling the sheriff, let me withdraw that? Do you recall, after faxing the report to the sheriff's department, that you were recontacted by telephone by the sheriff's officer?
I do remember that.
And that was Sergeant Roble, is that correct?
Yeah,
And Sergeant Roble asked you why the creatinine test was incomplete. Do you recall him asking you that?
Yes.
Okay, and do you recall telling him because the lab technician failed to take blood from the victim?
Not so much that they failed. I don't remember saying that. But for a creatinine clearance, I believe they need a serum and a urine, and it looks like that it may be one or both specimens. According to this report, as I look at it, there was no specimen received for either.
Okay, now, again, Do you recall telling Sergeant Roble at that time that you need both the blood and the urine to complete the test?
Object is asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
I think, yeah, it rings a bell.
And do you recall telling them that you only needed 10 milliliters of urine to conduct the test?
Yes, at least 10 milliliters. Yes, I do remember that.
I'm going to ask you to look at the report that's in front of you, not the exhibit, but the police report.
Okay.
And look at the last 3 lines there on page 3, which I think is the one that you're turned to. Just read it to yourself.
Uh-huh.
And you can turn to page 4 and read the rest of it if you want.
Okay, I do recall this, yes.
Does that refresh your recollection that you told Sergeant Roble that there was 90 milliliters of urine that was brought in?
I still wouldn't remember. And the reason why I say, if I may say so, when?
Well, the question, first of all, is,
Okay.
does that refresh your recollection?
No.
As to whether or not that's what you told?
No, it still doesn't. It still doesn't. But there's a reason why, though, that I would think that's why. But I won't state it if it's not necessary.
Alright, let me ask another question. I don't mean to keep you from talking, but let me ask another question here.
Okay.
And then just to be clear, if you look at the paragraph before that, and this may have been asked and answered, and I will apologize in advance, but I'm a bit unsure at the moment. Look at line 23 and 24 on that page 3. The sentence there.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Does that refresh your recollection that you told Sergeant Roble that the reason the creatinine test was incomplete was due to the lab technician failing to take blood from the victim?
Rings a bell.
So does that refresh your recollection that that's what you told Sergeant Roble after reviewing the records?
Yes.
Okay.
But there's also an explanation with that, too. But I won't add to it unless you want me to.
Okay, well, my question, is that what you told Sergeant Roble?
Your Honor, asked and answered. Object.
Yes.
Just a moment, I'm sorry. Overruled. And the answer was, yes.
Okay, I have no further questions.
Cross-examine?
Would you like to tell the jury what it is that you'd like to tell them about the explanation?
Yes, I would.
Objection. Calls for a narrative.
If they want me to.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'm sorry.
That means you can go ahead and tell the jury.
Okay, when we do research, you know, a medical staff person, we do not speak to patients at the regional reference lab. We only have their specimens. But in this particular one, when we receive a phone call, as Sergeant Roble had called, what I know I did was that I looked up in our reference manual for the information of what a creatinine clearance would require for a certain specimen. There are hundreds of specimen tests that we reference every day. You know, we'll get a phone call. What does a hepatitis surface antibody need, or a surface antigen need? Virgin 2 or not Virgin 2? Things like that. So if I remember in my mind back a year ago, and I do apologize for the incomplete explanation, but I do know that when I received the phone call, I looked up creatinine clearance in one of our reference manuals. And its spec, it just gave an explanation of it needed such and such specimen. And I don't even know it now, you know, even though we do creatinines every day. But it would just say something and then we'd have to give it.
Just a moment.
Okay, I'll ask you another question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me just ask you this.
Okay.
Looking at the document, 5107.
Uh-huh.
Is it your, as I understand, it is your opinion, in reviewing that document, that from that document, it indicates that neither one of the specimens were sufficient to do the test, correct?
That is correct.
Both the urine and the blood?
Uh-huh.
No further questions.
Yes.
Counsel?
Alright, now, you said you talked to Sergeant Roble from the Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
Last year, correct?
Yes.
And then you talked to an investigator, Scott Ross, on the 20th of this month, 4 days ago, right?
Yes, Friday.
And he went over what you had told Sergeant Roble, is that correct?
Uh-huh. Yes. This is the same page.
And you told him that you had been in communication with Sergeant Roble, correct?
Yes.
A year ago?
Yes.
And you told him that.
Back in February, too. February.
And you told him you received a subpoena in February of this year from the prosecution, is that right?
Yes.
I'm going to object as immaterial and irrelevant. It's beyond the scope.
Overruled. Go ahead. The answer was, yes. Next question.
Thank you. And when you talked to Mr. Ross 4 days ago, you told him that your recollection was correct. I'm sorry. Your recollection was consistent with the police report, is that right?
Yes.
And you told him that the specimen collected was 90 milliliters, is that correct?
Yes.
And you told Scott Ross that the amount needed for the test was 10 milliliters, correct?
Yes.
And you told him that the test was not performed as a result of lab personnel's failure to obtain blood, is that correct?
Yes, but that's with the explanation that I was giving to the other gentleman there.
You didn't give Scott Ross that further explanation, did you?
No, it's all coming back to me, you know, after a year.
So you told Scott Ross that the test was not performed as a result of lab personnel's failure to obtain blood, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, by the way, for calling me a gentleman. When Mr. Ross interviewed you, he didn't show you that report that's been marked for identification.
This one?
No, the lab report.
No, he didn't have it.
He didn't show it to you?
No, but I asked him if you had it, I'd be able to remember better, you know. Because I know in line 22 or 23, or, no, up here.
Objection. Non-responsive.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. During the interview you were not shown a copy of the lab.
No.
Of the report that you now have?
No.
I have no further questions. And I move that be admitted into evidence.
All right. Do you have any other questions?
I have no further questions.
As to the motion?
I'll submit it, Your Honor.
And I'll admit the document. You may step down. Thank you. Call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense will call Miss Mary Holzer.
Come forward, please. When you get to the witness stand, remain standing. Face the clerk here and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Mary Elizabeth Holzer. Holzer.
Thank you.
Good morning, Miss Holzer.
Good morning.
Miss Holzer, what kind of work do you do?
I am an office manager, paralegal for a law firm.
And which law firm is that?
Law offices of Feldman and Rothstein.
Is that in Los Angeles?
Pasadena.
Okay, and where is your home, without giving the address? Do you live in Los Angeles?
I live in Encino.
Okay, do you know someone? Actually, before I go into that, please give a brief history of your responsibilities at the firm.
I handle cases, clients.
All right, let me start a little better than that.
Okay.
When did you first start work at that law firm?
I believe it was 1985 or 86. I'm not sure.
And when you started work at the firm, what were you doing?
I was originally hired as a personal secretary to Mr. Rothstein.
And Mr. Rothstein is a partner at the firm?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and did you have any other responsibilities at that firm from time to time?
Yes, I do the banking. I do supply ordering. I handle clients that need assistance. Occasionally, you know, I work the files.
And have your job responsibilities changed through the years?
I've gotten more responsibilities, yes, over the years, of course.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, when I first started out, I was just as secretarial, and then it proceeded to. I was promoted to office manager, as our firm got larger. And then I took on more responsibilities.
Did you ever meet someone named Janet Arvizo?
Yes.
And do you know approximately when you met Janet Arvizo?
I can't give you the year, I'm sorry.
Do you know approximately when it may have been?
Maybe 1999.
Do you recall the circumstances under which you met Janet Arvizo?
The family came to our office to retain us to represent them in a case.
And what case was that?
It was a case, assault and battery, against J.C. Penney's.
And did your firm represent the Arvizo family in that case?
Yes.
And do you know who in the Arvizo family you represented?
David Arvizo, Janet Arvizo, Gavin Arvizo and Star Arvizo.
After your firm agreed to represent the Arvizo family in the lawsuit against J.C. Penney, did you have a lot of involvement with the Arvizos?
Yes.
Would you please explain what you mean?
I was in charge of, I don't want to call it hand-holding, but pretty much. They didn't have a car, so I drove them to appearances. I sometimes helped out when they didn't have childcare, when they needed. If David or Janet needed to go somewhere for the case. Not personal.
And did you talk to Janet Arvizo from time to time?
Daily.
And what do you mean by that?
She would pretty much call several times a day, yes.
That was almost every day?
Close, yes.
Would she call for you?
Yes.
And did you develop a friendship with Janet Arvizo?
That's kind of hard to explain. A friendship as in did I like her and were we buddies?
Yes.
She was a client.
Was she a friend?
No.
Did you talk to her children from time to time?
Yes.
And typically how would that happen?
They would come into the office. Usually they would pop in every once in a while and the children would come in my office, and sit on my lap, and draw me pictures, tell me how much they loved me, and write little notes and post it on my pinboard, and say how great I was, and that I was helping their family.
Would Janet tell you how great you were?
Yes.
How would she do that?
She always would say when everything's over, she wants to take me to Las Vegas and have a girls' weekend, and things like that.
Did you ever go to Las Vegas with her?
No.
Did you ever have a girls' weekend with her?
No.
Now, you indicated that you would drive the family to various locations?
Yes.
And you said you would drive them to appointments?
Yes.
What kind of appointments are you talking about?
Defense independent medical examinations, mediation, the minors' comps, hearings, depositions.
How many times do you think you drove the family to these various appointments while your firm was representing the Arvizos in the J.C. Penney suit?
Multiple times. More than I could count.
Now, do you recall at some point Janet Arvizo being in a driveway?
Yeah.
What do you recall about that?
Well, it depends on which driveway you're speaking of.
Well, what do you recall about her being in a driveway and falling down?
Throwing herself down on the ground?
Yes.
I'll object as relevance, Your Honor.
Overruled.
She had an independent medical examination with a physician for her injuries. I don't know if you want me to tell you.
Yes, please.
The whole story.
Yes, please.
I'll object to the narrative answer.
Sustained.
What did Janet Arvizo do in the driveway when she was there for that examination?
She threw herself down on the ground, started kicking and screaming, carrying on that the doctor was the devil, and the nurses were the devil, and they were all out to get her. And I explained to her that they were only asking her standard questions that they ask in an independent medical examination. That, the history of her injuries and how she obtained the injuries. And she was very defensive. And they asked us to leave because she was so irate.
Did you leave?
Yes, I took her out.
Counsel, let's take our break.
Oh, yes, Your Honor.